Okay, so we got 12:01, and I'll let people come in as they join. So we'll get going. And I know everyone's time is valuable, and I appreciate you guys joining this Lunch and Learn. And this is something that I do every 2 or 3 months. And this month I'm going to talk about supplier monitoring, including external providers of processes, products, and services, and those requirements related to ISO, IATF, and AS related to that topic. Let's see. A little bit about me. I am an IATF auditor that I work for a couple of registrars doing IATF registration and surveillance audits. I'm also a qualified lead auditor in ISO 9000 AS, the environmental standard, in 13485. I hold several certifications with ASQ. I consult with UT Center for Industrial Services. That's who's providing this training today. And we are a MEP, a Manufacturer Extension Partnership organization through the state of Tennessee. Every state has an MEP program, and if you guys aren't aware of yours, you should at least be aware of it and have contact with them, because a lot of times there's grant money available for training for companies that might need any kind of help, be it quality management system or environmental system or workplace development. If you need a resource, your MEP will be able to have one, or they can find one throughout the network of the MEPs. Because again, every state has one, and I'm working this training, or this presentation is brought to you through them. But we can consult in regards to doing gap assessments, certification help, helping with corrective actions, helping do internal audits, or help train your internal auditors, or help any other quality management system type training. But there is a caveat, there is a confidentiality. I cannot consult with any company that I audit. So for instance, if I audit company ABC, I cannot provide any consulting services for them. This is not considered consulting services. This is considered open enrollment type training, and this is free anyway. So this is no conflict of interest in regards to anyone. Okay. So the first clause we'll look at is the ISO clause 841, which simply says that we got to ensure that externally provided processes, products, and services conform to requirements. And you, the organizations, need to determine the controls you're going to put in place when products are provided by external providers, when you incorporate these products into your products. Controls could include receiving inspections, certificates of conformances that you receive from a provider or a supplier, or periodically auditing or sampling the supplier. The types and extent of the controls should be based on risks. Just like any other decision we're making in our quality management system, it should be based on risks. And records of these activities need to be maintained. Typically, that is in the supplier management, or the supplier monitoring, or the supplier selection process. When we're selecting a new supplier, we need to determine, hey, what's the risk of this new supplier? For instance, I was talking with a company this morning that's setting up a quality management system, and they have a supplier that's not ISO. They're not IATF. They're not anything. So in reality, they're not supposed to be using them per IATF unless they have customer's approval. But before they even go to the customer, they should do their due diligence in regards to identifying the risk. What is the product that they're supplying? Have we audited them? Do they have any systems in place? And what is the risk for this supplier? Maybe it's a one-off supplier that, hey, we can't get this product from anybody else. That also comes into play when we're selecting the suppliers. AS has a little bit more additional requirements, but they simply state that they got to require that externally providers apply appropriate controls to their suppliers, their direct suppliers and their sub-tier suppliers to ensure that requirements are met. So they need to roll down all requirements throughout the supply chain to the point of origin, which makes sense, and all companies should be doing that anyway. AS also has, you got to maintain a register of its external providers. That includes the status of approval, be it approved or temporarily approved or not going to be approved. The organization shall define the requirements for controlling records or documented information created by or retained by the external provider. So that supplier of yours or that external provider, we need to make sure they're controlling the records associated with whatever they're doing, be it receiving inspection or external inspection or the certs that they're providing. They need to control those. Going the wrong way. IATF says that the organization shall include all products and services that affect the customers, such as sub-assemblies, rework, sequencing, sorting, calibration services. Those need to be included in the scope that we define for our externally provided processes and products and services. So most of the time we talk about calibration. Yeah, we need to make sure we're using approved laboratories, external labs. But we should also include rework. You know, if we're using any companies to do rework on our behalf, or any companies that's sorting, if we hire a company to sort, we need to make sure we control them to the extent necessary. This could include, you know, our staffing agencies that we're staffing, that's hiring our temporary employees or our permanent employees in that case. Okay, why is my clicker not working well? Here we go. Supplier selection process needs to include an assessment of risk. We talked about that earlier. We got to include a risk analysis when we're selecting suppliers. Their quality and delivery performance or ability to perform. An evaluation of their quality management system. Are they ISO? Are they AS? Are they IATF? Or are they nothing? And this decision, when we select a supplier, it needs to be done by more than one person. It can't just be the purchasing process to say, hey, we're using this supplier. Why do you think the standard says that? Anybody? I'm asking for comments here. Well, why do you think we need to have a multidisciplinary team of proven suppliers? Why does that make sense?
Well, if you're looking for at the purchasing group only, they're only going to be focusing on the cost and not so much about the capabilities and the quality controls in place.
Sure, that's one reason, because they might be focusing strictly on cost. You know, cost. We're getting beat down by our customers. We might as well beat our suppliers down. Why else might you think that we need to be using a multidisciplinary team?
It reduces the risk of conflicts of interest.
Sure, it reduces the risks of you know, illegal activity or unethical behavior, you know, under the table sliding dollars, that kind of thing. So yeah, that it makes sense that we use a multidisciplinary team. And also the supplier selection process has to include an assessment of software capabilities of the supplier, because we might need to send information through Plex. If we're using Plex, can they use Plex or receive EDIs or ASNs? We need to make sure they have the capability to do that. Customer-directed suppliers. You know, IATF says, yes, we need to use customer-directed suppliers. If the customer says we got to use, you know, we got to use Nippon steel for the steel that we purchase. Well, we need to use Nippon steel. If that's what they demand and say, we need to use them. But the only thing that absolves us from is the selection process. We don't have to select them. But we still need to monitor them, evaluate them, work with them, hold their hand. What do we do if an organization, as an organization, if the supplier that the customer has directed don't work with us. Does anybody ever have that, had that experience where the customer directed supplier says pound sand or says don't reply back? What have we done, or what can we do? Anybody have a comment?
Hi, my comment would be that I contacted the customer for aid if I couldn't work it out between the supplier and myself.
Yeah, that's exactly what we're supposed to do or should do. I mean, it makes sense. You know, sometimes we are a little bitty fish in the pond, and the big Ford says we got to use this supplier. We got to use them, but sometimes they don't reply back because we're a little bitty fish in the pond. And if it becomes an issue, we need to go to the customer and say, hey, we're trying to work with Nippon here, but they're not answering the calls, they're not answering emails, and it's putting you at risk because we're supplying you product with their components. So yeah, you need to put it back on the customer to help you, because they're the ones that directed you to use this maybe subpar supplier. Documented process. You got to have a documented process, a procedure, some kind of process to identify what outsourced processes and the types that you're going to put in place and how you're going to control these external processes. Typically, that's done in the supplier development process. There's been a sanction interpretation come out a long time ago, but number 7 came out, and it said where characteristics of components are passed through an organization, meaning we get a part maybe from our sister plant and we don't do nothing to it. We just house it and then we ship it out when the customer orders it. The organization shall be responsible to ensure that adequate controls are in place at the point of manufacture, be it your sister plant or a supplier. How might we do that? How might companies today, or your companies, if you have any pass-through components, how do we ensure that the controls are in place at the point of manufacture? How could we do that? Anybody got any experience? Yeah, you would get a PPAPs from those suppliers. That's one way to at least show that they've done a PPAP. We could audit them. We could do sample inspections on them periodically, maybe an annual layout or something like that. That's one way to do it, but there's other ways. Anybody else have any other ways they've done that at your organization?
We've done poke before for presence or lack thereof.
What was that, Bill?
Poke yolks. So
Okay.
we'll put in a pin or something, a breadboard, just to make sure that it's present, the feature's present. So if someone does screw up, we're not going to compound it at our customer.
Okay, so you're doing some kind of an inspection or additional check to it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move on. AS adds a bunch of stuff in 8.4, but I've condensed it into a few things here. Extensive verification activities are required for AS, including validating the accuracy of test reports received from external providers. And you also have to have a recall or replacement process in place in the event that you have problems with their products. That could include, the validating of test reports. If we get steel certs in from a supplier, we might periodically test a sample of the steel to make sure the chemistry matches or make sure the inclusion count matches. But we also need to have a recall system in place. IATF has the requirement on statutory and regulatory requirements that we got to pass those down to our suppliers, and also that any purchased parts or processes that we receive, we got to ensure that applicable statutory and regulatory requirements are met in the country of receipt, the country of shipment, and the customer designated country. And that is if we know it. If we don't know the customer end user where it's going, we don't need to worry about it. But if in the contract it says these parts are going to be shipped to Brazil and they're assembling them, and then they're going to be shipping these to Peru, where the end users are going to be, we need to be aware of those requirements. Not sure how this is ever audited myself. I've never really run across this in my audit trails, but we need to be prepared for it if it does come about. Supplier development. You know, suppliers need to be 9001 minimum unless the customer approves it. For IATF, yes, you get your suppliers. It used to say that they had to be compliant, but they scratched that out with a sanction interpretation. And now it says that suppliers must be ISO 9001. If they're not, what do we do? What have some organizations done? We've said, yeah, we might contact our customer and get them to approve it, but we better be justifying it and documenting the risk and what controls we're putting in place to address those risks associated with this supplier that's not a minimum of ISO 9001. Software. If you have embedded software, there are requirements with that suppliers, they must have a process in place for software quality assurance for their products. Suppliers must complete a software development capability self-assessment, kind of like a CQI, but it's related to software development. And that's only if you have product that has embedded software, but there's more and more embedded software in components in automotive now than there's ever been. And I don't know if do any of you guys have any experience with embedded software and how you control those suppliers? Does anybody have any comments on that?
I know we have some of that where as part of the PPAP in the first article, we're running tests to make sure the software is running correctly. Along, you know, the standard other PPAP, the control plans to make sure that they're loading software correctly.
Okay. And then also somewhere along the lines, I'm sure you should assess your suppliers and make sure they are doing this self-assessment and hopefully submitting that to you maybe once a year. Typically is what that's done. Okay. Supplier monitoring. We got to monitor our suppliers. We must have a process in place to evaluate supplier performance that shall include quality. Usually that's PPM. It could be a percentage. It could be other measurables, but we got to measure their product conformity. Number of customer disruptions they have caused us. Their delivery performance, or their on-time percentage. And any special status that we're in because of them. You know, if we're on the red supplier list with Ford because of this quality issue from supplier X, we need to be including that in our supplier monitoring of that supplier X. How often do we need to be monitoring suppliers? Anybody have any idea of how often we're supposed to be? And everybody's right.
Annually.
We do ours monthly. I'm not sure what the standard is, but monthly we do an evaluation and send out scorecards.
Yeah.
Monthly scorecards from customers.
Yeah, the standard really don't say how often you need to. It just says suppliers must have a process to evaluate supplier performance. So monthly, if that makes sense to you, quarterly, if that makes sense. Annually, you know, I would frown upon a company that's doing it annually, saying, because if you're only doing it once a year, if they did something let's say last June, and we haven't even reviewed it and put it in our supplier monitoring system, and now we're in April, 10 months later, that's probably not appropriate. So really it depends. It depends on the organization. Who does supplier monitoring? You know, sometimes it's the quality departments that does it. It should be the supplier management process, whoever that is, be it purchasing or quality. Do we have to communicate this to the suppliers?
Yes, supplier quality manual.
Okay. And, you know, good practice is, yes, we need to, but the standard really don't say that we have to communicate this, and I'm talking about the supplier monitoring to our suppliers. But as an auditor, if you have a supplier that's red, and we've never communicated that to them, that's definitely going to be a problem. So yes, good practice is we do need to communicate that to our suppliers, especially if they're red or we have issues. You know, if they're green, you know, as an auditor, yeah, you can communicate to them, but you're not expecting a response back from them because they're green, good. But yes, if they're causing issues, you should and you shall communicate that to them. Okay. Second party audits. Second party audits are where the organization, you audit your suppliers. And the standard says we got to have a process to do that. And that process shall be based on risk, should be based on the status of their quality management system, their performance, their quality issues, their delivery issues that they have had, any other issues that we might have. Maybe it's financial, maybe they're in dire straits and on the brink of bankruptcy. That might be time to do audits on them to make sure they're not, you know, cutting corners and going to cause you guys problems. We need to determine and document the criteria for determining the need, type, and extent, frequency of second party audits. Typically, that's done through the scorecard system that we're monitoring our suppliers and giving them a score. It could be we set up to, you know, if they're below a 60, maybe that triggers us to do a second party audit. Or maybe it's if they're red 3 months in a row, that triggers us to do a second party audit. The criteria should also include customer complaints. You know, if we receive customer complaints from a supplier, or customer complaints from a customer that is caused by a supplier of ours, that probably makes sense that we should be auditing that supplier. Or maybe if they have a certain number of complaints related to them. But we shall have a system in place, and it should be based on risk. And if we don't have any any supplier problems, do we need to be doing second party audits? Probably not. But if we have a lot of supplier related problems, yes, we should be auditing, you know, problematic suppliers. And an audit, does it have to be done on site? And I'm just questioning, if we do a second party audit, does it have to be an audit on site?
You can do it virtually, but
Yeah.
Depends on what your process says.
It depends on what you've defined. It depends on the situation. It depends on a lot. But yes, you can do audits remotely. A second party audit don't have to be necessarily an audit like I do when I go in and audit your quality management system. It could be a product audit. We're auditing products because we've had these defects. Could be an on-site where we don't even go to the supplier. We audit their product in-house. That could be a second party audit. Second party auditors need to be competent. And this is one that a lot of clients kind of skip over, but IATF says, yeah, they got to be competent, and really the competency requirements are the same as an internal auditor. I mean, they're the same exact requirements that they need to be competent at, and showing competency can be anything from a certificate you get from training. It could be experience that they have had. It could be signing off from the quality manager that I've witnessed this guy and he's competent to be a second party auditor. They don't say you have to have, you know, certificates or or something formal. It can be informal training to get competency. IATF says we got to develop our second party or develop our suppliers. We need to be, with the ultimate goal of getting all of our suppliers to be IATF. That would be the ultimate goal. But we shall determine the type extent of evaluations for our active suppliers. And this determination shall include their performance, any audit findings we've had on them, the status of their QMS. If they're IATF, hey, we probably don't need to do much work with them. If they're only ISO, yeah, let's try to bump them up. And based on the risk analysis that we have done. And we shall implement actions necessary to resolve any open issues that we have with the suppliers. Basically, which suppliers do we need to work with? It should be the ones that's causing us headaches, the ones that's causing us late deliveries, or the ones that's causing us quality problems, or ones that maybe is going out of business potentially. And there's a lot of that going on in today's environment with suppliers that are, you can say, risky or on tinkering on the verge of going under. And we as organizations and suppliers to the automotive world and the aerospace world, we need to be aware of that and maybe developing alternate sources. And I'll ask the question, somebody mentioned to me the other day that GM has put out a directive that they don't want any supplies coming out of China in 2 years from now. Has anybody heard that? Has that been a directive for anybody?
I don't know if it's a directive, Joe, but I've been getting a lot of surveys about rare earths and those type of elements from both some of GM and Bentler and Ford.
Okay.
So I don't know if that ties with what that. I haven't seen that directive specifically, but I know I've been answering a bunch of surveys about the rare earth minerals. So if it's in your materials set, you got to find another source.
Right. Yeah. Anybody else have any heard that or I hadn't seen anything official, but somebody told me they had seen that, and but I haven't seen it. Nobody else. Okay. Management review. Management review in ISO says we got to review the performance of our external suppliers. And that's all it says. That could be a list of complaints we've had related to them, a list of scars that we've issued, or it could be the scores that we have evaluated from our suppliers. And all it says is we got to review trends and information on the performance of external providers and suppliers. Training opportunities. We do have an internal auditor class that we're teaching at Northeast State in Bluntville, Tennessee. That's an on-site class. We will be doing other internal auditor classes later this year that'll be remote. And I'm also developing ISO 9001 and IATF changes class. And this will probably be a 4-hour class that'll go over just the changes. So you people that are IATF registered or internal auditors right now, be it IATF or AS or ISO, you will need to be refreshed in regards to the changes to the standard. You won't need to go to a new internal auditor class. Don't think you have to do that. Some people will try to sell that. Yeah, you come to a new internal auditor class on the new ISO 2026 revision, which is supposed to come out in September. If you're already trained to be an auditor, you don't need that. You need to be trained and competent to the changes in the standard. So I would suggest that you go to a change class or a transition class, and we're offering one, and you can go to any others too. But ours are going to be remote, and they'll probably be a 4-hour class. And it ain't a whole lot to go over. There's very little changes to the both the ISO and the IATF, and it really boggles my mind that they are publishing a new standard, but they are. So that is my,
So
yes, sir.
are they gonna do this standard change? Are they gonna roll into all those guidances and write those in, or why are they changing?
Well, for ISO, it's just tweaking some requirements. It's adding more in regards to interested parties. A lot of cybersecurity stuff is going to be added. On the IATF side, it's really just going to be adding the sanctioned interpretations to the standard and adding any applicable ISO changes.
Okay, so it's
Mhm.
just trying to clean up those guidance documents that they issued.
Yes, it will be.
Okay.
Mhm. Any other questions regarding, what we're talking about here, supplier management, supplier monitoring?
I have a question.
Mhm.
So a previous auditor, external auditor, really insisted that every one of our management review meetings, we have 4 in a year, would cover every input. What is your interpretation on that?
That is not that's not a requirement to me. We can pull out the standard and look at it, but I think the standard says you got to do management review meetings, and you got to do at least management review meetings over a minimum of once a year, and they shall be based on risk. And if you are a company, like a lot of companies do, that they'll have maybe a monthly meeting or maybe a quarterly meeting, and they don't cover everything at every meeting. But as long as you're covering everything over the year, that's good. With the exception of if you have some high risk things going on. And for instance, if you have a scorecard from Ford that shows you're red, and you're only looking at scorecards once a year, and you've went 11 months since that thing was red, and you did 3 management reviews between that time, and you didn't address that in any of those management reviews, that would probably be an issue. But again, based on risk.
Okay, thank you very much.
Did that kind of answer you?
Yes, we
Mhm.
have a matrix, and then, of course, that's subject to change based on the business.
Right, and it should based on risk. Yeah. Very good. Any other questions here related to, we'll open it up for anything.
What's the best way to validate external providers to be compliant for calibrations and the ISO, IEC?
Yeah, it's for calibration services, that's a provider. They're providing you a service of calibration. They're also considered an external lab. So external labs need to be 17025 registered or equivalent. It could be A2LA or 1725, or there's a big or, because there's a sanction interpretation that came out on this. The or is that your organization has reviewed them and approved them based on, you got to have their internal lab scope. And their internal lab scope needs to include whatever service they're doing for you. For instance, if you have a company that's calibrating your, let's just say micrometers, and they're not 17025, the expectation would be is you have approved them based on you receiving their internal lab scope, and their internal lab scope needs to include calibration of micrometers. If their internal lab scope did not include calibration of micrometers, then why would you be using them? That would be an issue.
So if we, thank you for that, Joe.
Mhm.
So if we had, let's say they were IAC 17025 and they provided us with our certification, do we also have to have their lab scope to show that the micrometers are on that scope that shows that they are compliant to be able to audit that or to calibrate
Yes.
that? Yes.
Yes, because I have had clients that have had, they were, I think this client was using a scale, a weigh scale, and they used a company, an outside lab to calibrate them. And that outside lab had a lab scope, and that outside lab had well, they didn't have a lab scope. They had a certificate. They were 17025. But when I inquired, okay, that this are they competent to do scales? And we pulled their lab scope off the internet, and their lab scope included all kinds of things, all kinds of gauges and micrometers and joule blocks, and they could do torque wrenches and a lot of things. But weight scales was not on it. But they were calibrating this weight scale for this company, and they'll calibrate anything, but it's just not going to be within the scope of their accreditation, and that would be an issue.
I had a supplier that, I sent a tool in that was not in their scope. And, they outsourced it without letting me know, and I kind of had a fit. But at least they acknowledged that it was not within their scope.
Yeah, and I would be okay with that if they sent it to a company that was accredited and met your needs. Any other?
Yes, I just wanted to be notified before they took that action.
Yeah, that would be kind of frowned upon. Yeah, I would be upset with them too. They should have let you know. Mhm. One of those should haves, but at least they met the standard and the intent, it looks like. Any other questions, comments going on in the ISO or the IATF or the AS world?
Joe, I have a question.
Mhm.
Let's say it's a component, or if you're buying base metal from a broker or from a distributor, and they don't make the products themselves at their facility. How would we do audits on them, or how would we justify the products that they supply to us?
Yeah, that's a tough one. When you're talking about a bulk material supplier, you're typically dealing with brokers or agents. One thing you can do is I don't know if you have a list of these are the approved, I don't know if you call them mills or sources that you can buy from. That's one way to control them. Or you can audit their process. You could audit their process on how they select and control where they get these bulk materials from. But most of those companies that we're talking about, those brokers, they're not ISO, and they're not going to have much of a system or controls in place. So it really would go back to risk. What is the risk of you using this broker? Anybody else have any experience in that regards? And I think where Terry was coming from, they purchase aluminum ingots, aluminum blocks. Anybody have any experience with anything like that, and on how they might control those, call them bulk suppliers?
We receive the certificate of compliance with the requirements for the actual metal with the shipment.
Yeah, so you might receive certs, and maybe with somebody that's more suspect, maybe a broker that you haven't done much business with, maybe you're going to sample those more frequently than you do somebody else.
How do you maintain?
Could I add on to that, Joe?
I was just wondering about maintenance of conflict minerals when you're using brokers.
Yeah, I would assume you would need to get the certificates from them, and they would probably not come directly from them, but come from the ingot supplier. Yeah, I think they would just they would have to cascade that requirement down.
What we did at one time was where we had annual validations of that conflict minerals be provided by all our suppliers on an annual basis to ensure that that is being monitored.
Yeah, and usually that's done through the supplier management purchasing group, but sometimes that's passed down to the quality guys. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, on that question. So I'm having intermittent problems when we're shipping stuff across the border because we don't fall under a smelter because we're powdered metal. Has anyone else had a problem with the conflict minerals and the Dodd-Frank? Not because we don't have a lot of those materials in our material set, but what we have is we're getting recyclate that it's processed in the United States, but we're getting a lot of problems with our Mexican suppliers saying we need a smelter, and our Asian customers and our Mexican customers basically going over the borders causing a lot of consternation. And does anyone else have any problems with that? Because we don't have a true smelter in our raw material.
And Bill, that may be because, or is it because you're classifying, maybe putting the wrong NIST code or the classification on it going across the border? What's kind of holding it? What's being red flagged?
So we're alloyed steel, as you know, Joe. So basically, they're looking for, since the new regulations came out, they're looking for smelter identifications from our raw materials because we're a processor, and we're getting hung up and they're getting hung up, but we don't have a smelter per se because it's all powdered metal that we're converting. So has anyone else had problems with that? Because what I've been doing, I've been getting away with just sending the raw materials cert from our supplier, and so far it's worked, but it's just we don't like normally doing that. So I don't know.
Maybe a suggestion is putting on your paperwork somewhere that there is no smelter. This is powdered metal technology.
Hey, they rejected that, so thank you though.
Okay, all right. Anybody else have any experience with that? Nope, not a lot of powder metallurgy going on, or powdered metal sintering going on. There's not a lot of that in the U.S. left. There's a few. Which one is you, Bill? Which is fortunate. We still have some.
Well, it's nice because we're getting all that stuff coming back, which is nice.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, I'm going to end this, and I appreciate everybody coming online. And if you do need something in regards for continuing education units, send me an email and I'll reply with an email saying you get continuing education units. So with that, everybody have a good weekend and enjoy the warm weather out there.
Thank you,
Thank you, Joe. Great.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Great weekend.
Bye.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.